So, good morning. My name is Perry Sedman, and I am the resident capitalist of PISLAP. I'm honored to be able to introduce two people who really need no introduction. That's my one laugh. Nanette Shore and Peter Gable are the mother and father of PISLAP. I met both of them, and they're not related to each other. I met both of them at the same time about 20 years ago at a Michael Lerner conference in Washington, D.C. I believe it was called The Politics of Meaning. And at that conference, they rounded up lawyers that formed the initial PISLAP group, and I was drawn to their vision. Over the years, they have been the heart and soul of PISLAP. They continue to inspire me, as I'm sure they will inspire you. Nanette has been the keeper of the flame, a brilliant embodiment of a compassionate and empathic person about whom we heard last night. And Peter is the most down-to-earth intellectual I know. Don't be daunted by what you are about to hear. He is a warm, caring, wonderful guy, a real mensch, and I'm sure he would love to meet and chat with each of you a little later on. So let's give them a warm welcome.
Thank you, Perry. That was great. Of course, Perry has also been one of the keepers of the flame, and also the keeper of our sense of humor. But beyond that, he's been one of our core members and participants through all these years, and has tried to bring these principles into his own life and work as well, and in many different ways. So. Just really thrilled that Perry was here, and thank you for that beautiful intro. So, good morning, everyone. It's just fantastic for me to see you all here and welcome you once again this morning, those who were here last night and those who are just joining us. I'm Nanette Shore, as Perry said. I've been helping to organize this conference, and the thing that I'd like to start to talk with you about is to tell you about how this conference was put together and what the different components of it was, because it really speaks to part of the mission of this conference, which is to bring together a community of people committed to this goal. So I think the first part of the mission statement talks about bringing empathy, compassion, love, and care into the legal culture and legal profession, and to infuse that as deeply as we can. But the other part of that is it can be hard to think about these issues in isolation. And so bringing together community in some of the ways that Rhonda helped us do this morning is very, very core to our goals. So I want to recognize some folks, and I want to start my talk with that. So first, the New York City organizing group team for this conference, and that's Judge Maria Arias and Professor Victor Good and Ryan Dooley of CUNY. Is Ryan here? Ryan's helping out, but Ryan Dooley. And all of their vision, their outreach, their wisdom have really guided this conference's development since its inception. And as you can see, their envisioning of the conference has resulted in a wonderful mixture of talks, contemplative moment, community, and perhaps even a bit of music as the conference goes on. The next person I'd like to recognize who I also don't see in here. Is Knock, are you in here? Knock. Knock Wen. And Knock has been registering everyone, so that's how you'll have met her. And you're going to be hearing from her tomorrow morning on the panel called Transformative Practices in New York. But Knock has been given, I just met Knock about a half a year ago, and she has given a huge amount of her time and energy and care to co-creating this conference. She's got technological savvy, she's got financial acumen, and she's got heart and soul. So she's bringing all these wonderful qualities together and really helping us reach out and create the infrastructure for our conference. And of course, the idea of having a home here at CUNY Law School is incredibly meaningful, to have that institutional base of support and collaboration. And also, I'm not sure if they're here yet, but our colleagues Lisa Reiner and John Paul Coote, who are with the Community Legal Resource Network, and they have really worked to accredit our panels with CLE, which is also a wonderful accomplishment for this kind of work and this kind of thinking, to have to be able to be accredited as continuing legal education. I like that kind of legal education. So are Lisa and John Paul here? Great, Lisa, thank you. Good morning. I also want to appreciate Marjorie Silver, who is, I think is here. There she is, Marjorie. And Marjorie is a professor at Touro Law School and joined the PISLAP community a number of years ago. And Touro is actually a co-sponsor of this conference, and Marjorie has given of herself to do thinking and planning for the conference. And she's also the editor of the forthcoming book called Transforming Justice, that I think many of you have flyers for in your packet, and if you don't, pick one up when you get a chance at the table. That book, which Marjorie is still working on, includes essays by many people who are presenting here, and I think will be a great contribution to the field. And last, I just want to honor each and every one of you who have come to present, those who have traveled here from around the country, and as we heard last night, even from Beijing, China, and who have left your homes, your families on a weekend to share with us, to be with us, and as well those who are based here in New York City. Some of you are longtime members of the project, others are new to it, but I want to thank you for taking a chance on this, on taking a chance for connecting to a hopeful vision and to being with us together this weekend. So, sort of the last sort of circle of appreciation that I want to mention is our National Executive Committee of PISLAP, which is Peter Gable, Perry Sedman, Doug Amar, Bruce Peterson, along with myself. And their presence and energy through thick and thin, through the years, have kept this project vital and really have brought us to this point of our first conference in a major law school. And I also want to recognize our David Lerman, who was the first restorative justice practitioner funded by the New York State Legislature in Wisconsin. David introduced us to Jonathan Sharer, and David passed away a number of years ago, but he was a member of our executive committee, and he's in our hearts today as well. And I said that last, but I'm actually not quite done. I want to thank Peter Gable, for his incredible time and care and vision in co-creating this conference and working with me. There's been no detail of the conference that has been too small for Peter's elegant sense of care and loving attention and interest. And I'm so appreciative, Peter. It was so cool and wonderful to work with you on this. And last, there's another piece of my community that has helped, and our community that has helped to shape this conference, which is the work of the National Network of Spiritual Progressives, and which is also a co-sponsor of today's conference. And you'll actually be hearing from their executive director, Kat Savas, via Skype, hopefully if it all works out tomorrow morning, briefly. While the NSP is not a lawyers group, And we do have actually one other NSP representative here, Bruce Hirsch, who's a physician, and very, very glad he's here today. And the NSP's influence and thinking and vision has really informed this conference in many, many ways. You'll hear a bit more about it, but it really embodies the whole concept of how to be what we've called a spiritual progressive activist or a transformative activist. So I guess, when you think of spiritual activism or transformative activism, what I think about is that everything that we do, every action, every initiative, should be a generator of connection and should reflect a way of thinking and being that opens the heart and also helps us deal with the fear that holds us back from revealing our own longing for community. And we've really tried to bring that spirit to organizing this conference and to thinking about it. Last week, Ryan Dooley and I met with a group of CUNY law students over the lunch hour to introduce them to the project and the conference. And one of the issues raised by one of the students was, well, what do you mean by a spiritual dimension? I'm not religious, I don't identify as spiritual, but I do feel committed to social justice. Does this movement, does this conference speak to me? And my answer to that student was yes, that it does. If you feel a sense of mutual connection, if you feel a sense of interdependence with your clients, with your colleagues, with your community, and you have a passion for bringing those values, that feeling of interconnection and the kind of loving kindness that Rhonda was envisioning with us this morning into the legal culture in ways that elevate empathy and compassion and mutual understanding, as Victor was talking about last night and Maria was talking about, and Bruce as well, then this project does speak to you and embrace you. I also told her that in my sense and my experience and knowing a lot of people in this project, that people really all come in through their own path. You heard last night Bruce's path was through the Protestant tradition and a theistic upbringing. And some people do come from a specific faith tradition and they see their religious values as directly informing their work in the legal culture. And then there are others who don't come from that kind of background at all and are really just coming to this work from a sense of of an understanding of a world that's mutually interdependent and interconnected. And so I like to think that our project really embraces all of those paths. Another person I was speaking with about this conference looked at our mission statement and says, what does love have to do with the law? In the mission statement, it says to bring a love and care, I don't remember the exact words, into the legal culture. And really aren't the two different realms. And Maria spoke to this a bit last night, that we're not talking about sentimental love or perhaps romantic love. But what we are talking about, and we didn't use the word love accidentally, is the kind of connection that it's not a distant or an abstract connection. It's a connection that holds a very, very personal sense of involvement, of mutual, of genuine feeling, to the extent that we're able to bring that feeling to ourselves. And I want to refer to Rhonda's meditation, because she was asking us, can you go to that next circle? Can you go to the people that you don't know here in Long Island City or even in the larger world? And obviously that's not always an easy thing to do, but I think that the goal of bringing the love into the law is actually, to me, a very worthy goal, and to grapple with what that word means and not to be pushed away from it because the two concepts seem a bit dissonant. As Perry mentioned, PISLAP was founded in 1996 in sort of a very loose way. I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a feel while I was speaking about how I came to this project. I grew up in a Jewish family that was deeply connected to the core tenets of the tradition. And it really felt clear to me at an earliest childhood that living a full and meaningful life for me meant engagement with the world's sorrows and injustices. And the dictum that, of course, many of us have heard, tzedek, tzedek tirdov, justice, justice shall you pursue. And social justice was really my passion in my childhood, even as a child. Civil rights, anti-war movement, women's rights, human rights, these were my touchstones. And I did go to law school with the goal of trying to do work that was advancing those principles. And holding in my mind the idea, the desire to get deeper insight into social problems and to find an arena where I could make a difference. Well, back in 1991, I met Michael Lerner, who's the editor of Tikkun magazine that's been referred to by a number of people. And then in '96, I met Peter, who at the time was working on a platform plank on law that was to be presented at a national summit on ethics and meaning, which is the conference that Perry referred to. And that platform envisioned change in 4 areas. One was fostering the use of alternatives to the traditional adversarial process that focused on repair of relationships and of the torn social fabric. And of course, examples of that we were thinking of was restorative justice in the criminal justice system, although it's actually advanced to other arenas now, as we'll hear later, and mediation and collaborative practices in the civil arena. The second was emphasizing the role of the law as an entity, as a force for commitment to the larger social good. And how the actual practice of law can embody that in many, many different ways, no matter what area of law you're in. And one of our earliest PISLAP members was counsel to the 3M Corporation. And he, in his counseling of his client, he raised many ethical issues, many issues about the environment, about the treatment of workers and employees and the communities that corporation affected, and created a lot of important dialogue in his corporation, which he would share with us, of course, to the extent he could. And that was very much a part of what PISLAP was envisioned to do, is to really bring the law in whatever area you practice in, whether you're a corporate lawyer, a patent lawyer, really a private practitioner, whether you work for government, whether you're a teacher, all those areas of law, there are many, many ways in which these principles can be creatively and energetically brought to your work. So the shifts in the legal culture that we were talked about at this 1996 conference were really not seen in isolation, and that was really what was part of so brilliant about this conference, which was that they were supposed to complement shifts in medicine and the healthcare system and education and corporate accountability and respect for the environment. And it was really a vision of interconnected social transformation. And so the work of shifting the legal culture was really envisioned as part of that larger project. And so from there, we went on to work on organizing PISLAP. And I can tell you that organizing a movement of lawyers or people in the legal profession is not an easy matter. There were many times I wondered whether we would endure. And sometimes I thought I was involved in a quixotic effort that I wondered was drawing me away from other things where I might have a more practical impact on the world. But then there would be these incredible moments of inspiration and connection, and then the project would reemerge and strengthen. And so that's been the sort of the cycle, and yet it's grown and grown over the years. So, but I do want to, creating a movement together is not an easy or straightforward path. It has many difficult twists and turns. So in my own work, I went on to find, after law school, very meaningful work, ultimately in the legal services office in the Bronx, where I've worked for over 20 years. One of my former colleagues, Andy Arts, is here today, which I'm so happy for. Our office is really filled with socially conscious staff members who serve low-income clients across a broad array of civil practice arenas. So I've really had an opportunity over the years to think about how the mission of PISLAP and the kinds of values that we talk about can be consciously brought into my day-to-day work and into the culture of our office. And that's sometimes been challenging, but but I think on the other hand, it actually does infuse the work, perhaps in a somewhat unstated way. The clients that we work with really face very, very difficult life circumstances, community violence, grinding poverty, maybe traumas from which many people that we serve have never healed, and it keeps them vulnerable and in need of real support. And one of the things we've done that I really consider very much akin to a PISLAP philosophy is what we've come to call as holistic legal representation. And so that has a number of dimensions. One is representing the client as sort of a whole person, so looking at both their legal needs in the broadest possible sense, not just the issue they walked into our office with, but any legal need that might directly affect that issue. So if you're about to get evicted from your apartment, it's going to be very hard for you to perhaps work on other issues that are pressing but aren't as immediately threatening. So a holistic approach to legal representation, but also looking, bringing social work into our work so that we're looking at what are the traumas that individual has faced, what are the sources of stress and pain in their lives, and how can we give them support and strength to help them work with us more effectively. So that's one aspect of sort of the holistic model that for me feels very, very close to PISLAP. And then another is sort of an inside-outside approach to changing the system, trying to have an impact on the systems in which our clients operate and work. And so that sometimes involves sometimes it involves bringing litigation, because that creates a huge pressure point on the system. For example, if you're litigating, just to give you a little example, right now our office, and something I'm working on, is involved in a lawsuit against New York City for its practice of removing children from schools who are having behavioral issues or behavioral meltdowns to the psychiatric emergency room. And children as young as 5 are removed, and it's quite a huge problem throughout the city. We've gotten a lot of data on it, and clearly there's some concerns and issues around how the teachers perhaps and the administrators don't know how to deal with children that have these significant emotional issues. Sometimes there might be other motivations involved, but it's a tremendously traumatic experience for these children and for their parents, who sometimes rush to the school when they hear that the ambulance is being called, and then are sometimes overruled and told, well, I'm sorry, we need to take your child to the emergency room, even though the child's just sort of sitting there and has calmed by then. So this practice is one that we found very troubling, and we brought a lawsuit, and we're in the middle of litigating that and also having negotiations around that. And I think pressure points of that kind of litigation, which can bring some, if you will, some power to the situation. I'm thinking now of some of the lines from the thinking from the letter from the Birmingham jail last night, where Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of the importance of bringing of sit-ins, of nonviolent resistance as bringing pressure points, making that negotiation possible, but from a position of strength rather than a position of weakness. And so I think that sort of approach to shifting the legal culture by creating these pressure points through litigation can be very powerful, and can help to make changes that are humanizing. And of course, when you're having a dialogue about that with your opposing parties, you're trying to bring those, the impact of these actions to people's attention. So that's one approach, and then the other approach is sort of working in a more collaborative way. So creating coalitions, committees, collaborative work groups with people who may be on opposing sides, and I've been working in a number of those over the years in the area of child welfare and family law, where we're bringing together judges and advocates who represent the city, who represent children, who represent parents, parent advocates, caseworkers, and we're bringing them together to talk about the impact of trauma and to work on new policies that can make some shifts in the culture. So for example, one policy I worked on with people for many years was creating a new policy around family visiting. So when children are in foster care, they've in the past been very limited to, in the past it used to be one visit every other week, and then maybe one visit a week now, supervised by a caseworker, very artificial environment in which to see your child. And so we've been able, working with the child welfare agency lawyers and with the administration, to talk about that policy and what it means and how it affects families, and to work together to create a shift. And out of that coalition and inside effort, if you will, we actually developed a new policy, which was instituted, which was issued by the commissioner about a year ago. And of course, now the devil is in the details in implementing it. But I think, in terms of thinking about a approach to the law that brings empathy, compassion, and care, that you work with your adversaries, you work with people who are on the other side, you work with them, you bring pressure on them, but you always do it from a humanizing point of view, from a perspective of love. So I actually have a lot more in my talk, but I'm realizing I've been speaking a long time. I'd like to say, turn it over to Peter now. Thanks.
Thanks for the beautiful words, Nanette, and what you said about me, both you and Sharon. Thank you. In addition, thank you for that. So, okay. So, this is a beautiful gathering, and I actually do feel what Rhonda was trying to elicit, and the capacity to see all of you as the loving beings that you are, the same as me, present inside yourselves, here together with each other. But it is important to also acknowledge the sad, in some ways, state of the world outside the room and outside our conference. Many people have felt in the last weeks with ISIS, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. Now we have Ray Rice and domestic violence issues. We have Ferguson. We have another child abuse issue that came up yesterday with another football player who felt the need to bring hit his 4-year-old child with a switch and caused harm to the child, because that's what had been done to him in East Texas. The world is in trouble, and there's a sort of awe that I sense in my friends about what to do about it. It's alarming. So, what's the problem here? The problem is that in all these situations, the people, the actors in these situations cannot recognize the humanity of the other for reasons I'll talk about, I think, in a second. They can't see the other as themselves. They see a demon, a threat, a source of potential degradation and humiliation. And so the pro-Russian rebels think that they're identified that way, develop a hard defensive identity, and see the people in Kiev as out to get them. And of course, there's a real history to these fears. But the point I'm making about them at the outset is that the core problem is that they cannot see our common humanity. They cannot see the humanity of the other at the time that they form an image of the other and feel compelled to act against them. And we need to build a spiritual political movement that enables an opening up in the social space of the world so that people can thaw their way out of these impactful shells of fear and come to be able to recognize the presence of the other, the presence of the other. So that's a very different kind of movement from the classic political movements of the past. It's not to seize the Winter Palace, to overthrow the bourgeoisie, to kick out the aristocracy, send them to the guillotine. Forget it. That's not the plan. That's not working. It's going on for centuries. We need a different approach that is so different that it's very difficult to experience it. One great thing about a gathering like this is you get some traction that it could actually be understood by many people. And of course, what needs to be understood is not a concept, it's not a cognitive idea, it's not a thinking thing. It's a opening up of the heart in social space that allows a flow of mutuality to become visible, to become manifested, and to elevate the inter-experience of us with one another in a way that has radiant influence outward and therefore begins to heal at the edges everyone else. So that's a reason for optimism, because everyone wants it. Wherever we are, you can be in the most burned out courtroom in the Hall of Justice doing misdemeanor cases one after another. The secret is everyone is feeling, God, I'm in a burned out courtroom. Everyone is wanting to transform their experience, to transform that space, to see and be seen as we really are. So this is the desire in all of us, the desire for mutual recognition of each other's humanity. That desire to, maybe I've said it well enough, Martin Buber, the Jewish theologian, described it as the desire to be seen as in a relationship of I and thou, which each of us is a thou to the other. Each of us is an I in relation to a thou, if we can make it manifest. I'm feeling in this gathering that kind of understood, which is very cool. Often, if I'm speaking into a setting in which it's not obviously understood. There hasn't been a meditation like Rhonda's. You're talking to, not a wall, but you're talking to a tough audience about a truth that is not easily accessible, not because it's not affirmed in social space, and therefore doesn't gain its radiant self-evidence. This truth is self-evident when it can become manifested in public space. So our goal is to manifest it in public space. Now we have many, again going back to the problems of the world. We pass each other with blank gazes on the street. We live in a world in which this longing in each of us is not reciprocated by the other, typically. It's hinted at out of the side of the eye, but it's not, it's denied in everyday life much more than it is affirmed in everyday life. I took the subway here yesterday, and so there's, the subway. And I've been, it's cool. I'm from San Francisco now. The New York subway's cool. But, there everyone is in their rows. And I did a practice of just thinking of each of these people have had childhoods. Everyone was born. Everyone was born with joy in their eyes, longing to connect with the first being they encountered. Every single one of them. And has this long history, just like mine, with all the service and effort and failure and hope and despair. Everybody right here on the train. And it was cool. It was so, And then a lovely thing happened. The guy next to me was trying to learn English, and he showed me a picture on his cell phone of 4 destroyed vehicles and a bunch of letters. And first he said, "Can you help me? I can't figure out what the word is to describe these vehicles." And I looked at it for a minute, fearing I wouldn't know the answer. But I saw the answer was wreck. W-R-E-C-K. So I said, wreck. W-R-E-C-K. Because I thought the W might be a challenge for him. But he got it, and he was very happy about it, and there was a little mutual recognition in the middle of this. We were comrades, I helped him. And he was happy to connect with me. Okay. So what we need to do is to build a movement that overcomes that social truth of mutual distance and internalized fear of the other that prevents the emergence of this longing for authentic mutual recognition that, in a way, if it could get out, would be happy. But it can't get out because it anticipates a reciprocating rejection by the other, therefore leads to a withdrawnness of the self behind an artificial ego and the roles that we play. I often do the newscaster as an example of this. The Red Sox win a fire in Dorchester. So many of you have heard me do this before, but the blank gaze, there's something about a fire that's connected to the Red Sox. This guy is not here. He's not talking to me. And you're pushed back into the couch when you are that kind of psycho-spiritual frozenness and non-presence. It's secretly traumatic. We've long since forgotten the trauma because we're acculturated into it, to CNN and all the rest. And that world, the world of unsupple, role-based behavior that is thrown up on the outside of our being as a way of mediating our relationship with each other but concealing who we actually are. Behind a conditioned way of enacting ourselves, that is how we have been largely recognized in our lives up to this point. That's our dilemma. So, to solve this requires a social solution. We need a public communal response to this situation of social separation and fear of the other that can treat it, heal it, allow it to subside in the face of a greater, more heartfelt, more open-hearted channel to each other. And this is where the law comes in, because the legal system that we have inherited, which is the public, in a way, it's the public communal response to social problems, that's binding on us. It's the one that's binding on all of us. It's not a personal opinion, it's the law. And the legal culture that we have inherited from the 18th century is the envelope that we are stuck in. It had many virtues: the recognition of individual rights, the freedom of the individual, the affirmation of individual liberty against coercive forms of group persecution. We can recognize, we can say, hurrah for the 18th century. You know, they did a great job with what they were up against at that evolutionary moment. But okay already, you know, that was hundreds of years ago. We don't have to keep going back to what the founding fathers were really thinking. They're younger than almost everybody in this room. So, you know, let's start over. Let's add to the equation. Now, the legal system that we've inherited perceives the world. It's not only that it protects individual rights and that that's its hallmark, but it perceives the world as a collection of individuals. It treats us all as essentially non-social creatures who are disconnected from each other, disconnected monads, I sometimes say. I'm trying to draw circles. Each one of us is a circle floating in space, separate from each other. We might form a relationship if we want to, through voluntary means. We might make a contract or form another kind of relationship, but the assumption is that we are discrete, socially separated beings rather than inherently socially connected beings. So in the law that envelops us, that we practice, teach, create into an influential profession, we have the individual is everywhere. Contracts pictures a world of socially separated individuals, each seeking to maximize his or her own bargain in a competitive economy and pursue his or her own self-interest. That's the basic assumption of the whole thing. Once you get inside that assumption, the capacity to see all these transactions as co-creations of the world, of goods, services, what we are making and sharing together, it becomes impossible to see because everyone is scattered into that separate state. In torts, the entire subject matter is about the duty not to harm others by pulling a chair out from under them or having a Coke bottle blow up in the store or ramming your car into them. All those things are important, but it does not capture our bond to each other, only our right to be separated from each other and protected against each other. Property law equally pictures a world in which scattered, isolated people with one or two others who are covered in the family area, inhabit land and have the right to kick everyone off of their land, captured by the idea of a mental inscription, an imaginary inscription called a title, that is pictured to be around the land, the border of which entitles you to keep everyone else off of it. But there's no suggestion of sharing the earth together in commonality. It's not a part of the law that we're teaching, so it's not something in property that you would be conveying as an ethic, as an aspiration for a neighborhood like ours here. What happens to a neighborhood like ours? Instead, each private owner can sell his or her land as a commodity in a competitive market through a contract, and from that you get the somewhat spectacular and beautiful Times Square or the amazing creations of Western capitalist cities, but you don't get shared, jointly created land use that comes out of a common desire for what a neighborhood or a village or a community should be like. So, and the Constitution, of course, although it contains many important principles about individual liberty, the Constitution has nothing in it about our aspiration to community, our aspiration to realize the spiritual bond that already unites us, that every child, when he or she is born, seeks out in recognition from the other. Instead, it's an individualist document that assumes we all need protection primarily against others rather than channels to manifest our love and empathy for the other, our connection to the other. So, what I'm saying about this is that the difficulty we are in as a movement is that we are trying to make manifest a open-hearted way of recognizing each other's humanity and coming into contact with each other in a profession and in an inherited envelope that does not recognize that as what the project is. So we have to sneak it in. We can meditate in private and try and gain access to that loving kindness, to that spirit. We can practice, but we're practicing against the grain when we practice a spiritual, political, or spiritual progressive approach to law. We're trying to fit it in. The judges here are trying to figure out, what can I do in my courtroom to make this manifest? Since there are so many forces trying to block it, or going against it, or that do not presuppose that that's the purpose of our public gathering, to make that manifest. I have nothing but admiration and affection for the lawyers here who I know are trying to do this with their clients, who are creating new forms of practice that generate this loving spirit in the face of tremendous odds and very difficult circumstances in which the alienation of the world seems to constrain them and make the task so much more difficult. Let me say one more thing about the law. So, and I don't know how many law students are still here, but there are many other levels besides the levels that I was speaking to. The facts, the way that you learn them in law school, they're flat and dead. You know, plaintiff sued defendant for pulling the chair out from under him at the table and he fell down. That's it. There's no telling of that story in a way that reflects the injury that probably occurred, that is responsive. There's no spiritual depth to the telling of the story of the facts that makes them accessible to spiritual, intuitive, open-hearted knowledge, because they're flattened out in the liberal model for the application of the rule, which is then to be done by either the analytical part of the brain, which is what you're supposed to be an expert in law school, and with the help of reasoning by analogy, which is basically based on the common sense of the system as it is, the very common sense of the system that needs to be transformed, because it needs to be, whether something is like something else in a system in which everyone is alienated, only reconfirms the alienation, although it makes perfect sense because that's the way the world is. So, sometimes transcendent elements enter into law, including the Supreme Court culture, the public legal culture. For example, social movements are occasions in which the desire for mutual recognition, the emergence of a presence that is very great, idealistic, and motivated by justice, they rise up That's what really a movement is. What moves is the spirit from a passive, withdrawn state, living out life as it's inherited, into a force that suddenly makes itself into the world, and people emerge into contact with each other in a way that transcends who they previously were. And often, when a movement gathers steam, it spreads very quickly. 1963 was still the 50s. 1965, the world was changed as demonstrations began to spread from San Francisco to Prague to Paris to Mexico City, all over the world, really. As the movement begins to catch and people come to believe it's possible to come out of the hiding that has been consigned to them. And to take one example, the civil rights movement, its tremendous elevating capacity, which I talked about for a minute last night, talking about watching Martin Luther King on the news as a boy, had a profound moral and spiritual influence on everyone in the culture, including white people like me, who had been, I don't know what my concept of race was fully before then, but who had been just living my life the way I was. And the moral intensity of that nonviolent resistance in the civil rights movement produced a higher awareness of the suffering of slavery that had been invisible prior to that time. The effects of Jim Crow, of segregation, but also the whole legacy of slavery as a distortion of humanity and as an incapacity to recognize each other's humanity became visible in the transcendent expression, moral expression of the movement itself. Not only Dr. King, but the force of African Americans emerging from the black churches to express this truth publicly and to suffer for it. And so in law, one thing that came out of that was the affirmative action, apart from the Civil Rights Acts and the legal changes that allowed people to eat at lunch counters, was the doctrine of affirmative action. But the doctrine of affirmative action, as it emerged from the civil rights movement, was a redemptive doctrine that at a certain moment everyone wanted. Of course, everyone didn't want it. But many, many people felt we must do this in order to heal ourselves from the moral catastrophe of slavery. We all will be better off, our beings will be more fully realized if we engage in this redemptive activity of healing the culture through affirmatively taking action to repair the distortion that prior generations have been a part of and that I have partly inherited. That meaning of affirmative action had tremendous appeal. It was a meaning that was prior to and expressive of the movement's life force, not a parsed, disembodied, abstract legal doctrine. When the movement got into into constitutional litigation, it ran into the individualism that I was describing earlier, in which this spiritual redemptive dimension of affirmative action is inherently invisible because the world of law does not picture us as connected, as I was saying, but only as a collection of individuals competing for equality of opportunity to make it in the existing world. So what was originally a spiritual legal idea was recast as a competition between individuals for a limited number of slots in which one individual thought he had jumped through all the competitive hoops that he or she was supposed to, and the other was claiming because of a past discrimination that they deserved a leg up. In other words, it was recast as a competition within the individualistic system under the Equal Protection Clause, rather than as a transcendent attempt to heal the spiritual injury that we all, when I say we all, many, many people, not just the black community, but many people across the country, morally moved by the movement, wanted to be part of transforming for our own sake, not only for the sake of the people who were harmed. So when the movement got into the legal arena, here's the point I'm making. When the movement got into the legal arena, it inevitably tended to lose itself because its transcendent aspirations for love across our racial differences and for healing what has separated us became recast in a discourse, in an analytical way of seeing, and in a mental picture of the social universe that denied that this spiritual bond exists between all of us and sees us instead as disconnected, rational actors pursuing our own individual ends. So, this happened to the labor movement, it happened to the women's movement as well. Movements that, as they rose up, became a spiritual challenge to everything that was. The labor movement and its desire for an egalitarian society, not based on class. The women's movement in an attempt to go beyond patriarchy in all of its manifestations. Male dominance, but also male rationality, control of public space, control of sexuality, limiting of women's sexuality, distortion of men and how men were conditioned. All of that transcendent aspect of the women's movement, as it entered into legal rights claims, became emptied of that spiritual content and replaced by equal rights to succeed in a competitive economy, break the glass ceiling, get higher wages, go to law schools like this one, all of which are important and great victories, so don't misunderstand me. The achievement and the fulfillment of the liberal ideal of the 18th century continues, and we are, with gay marriage, we've made another step in carrying out that idea of the liberal idea of equality. But where we are here is we are starting a new paradigm, a post-liberal paradigm, in which our connectedness to each other becomes the central dimension of the new legal universe and legal culture that we need to create, in which it isn't the rational mind doing legal analysis within the existing paradigm that is what is needed. It's a thawing and a healing of the distortions in human interconnectedness, and an overcoming of the fear that separates us, so that law and legal processes can make manifest our longing to fully recognize each other, understand one another, and realize ourselves through the other rather than see the other as a threat. That's a new movement that I think we are a part of, along with the restorative justice movement, the transformative mediation movement, the contemplative law movement. We're all scattered around right now trying to be born in the kind of, I don't know if it's the womb, but whatever, in the liberal, inherited liberal envelope, we are trying to crawl out of these individualistic, analytical, legalistic ways of thinking that are the inherited envelope into a new way of creating legal processes that won't be a new system of rules with new analysis based on better values. That's not the idea. The idea is new processes that allow us to open up to each other and to begin to heal an injured world, a traumatized world. So as I say, the thing we have going for us is everyone wants it. We all long for it. We all need it. We're all stuck in the envelope together. We all long to fully recognize each other. And therefore, in every setting that we're in, we have that working for us. And in a way, all the negative elements in the world, are just postponing our success. We can't lose. We can only be postponed. Because this is what I'm describing as a human need that's essential for us to evolve to understand, which is our social nature. We long for a channel to be made in public space, to happen in public space, where we can see ourselves recognized in public as loving beings who long to heal what separates us. And if we can begin to create these channels, they have radiant influence. They go choo, 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 choo. It's not like we have to add them up one by one until we have accomplished something. Because they fulfill a human desire that's currently denied across the culture. So that's the source of my optimism that we're moving forward to create something beautiful.